Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to go back to the 2006 Champions League Final and look to see how Frank Rijkaard's substitution saved Barcelona against 10-man Arsenal. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Barcelona in a 4-3-3, and we end up seeing Arsenal playing in that 4-5-1 that helped them get to the final. What we see from Barcelona here is they did make a few modifications, specifically up front, where we did see Samuel Eto'o play from the left and Ronaldinho playing in the center of the pitch ahead of Sol Campbell and Tyrrell. The reason being is that they wanted someone who was able to track the runs of Eto'o who would look to push forward. And there they did trust Samuel Eto'o over Ronaldinho based off the fact that Ronaldinho did have a past of not tracking the runs of the opposing fullbacks. So 4-3-3 against 4-5-1, there should be battles across the pitch, and Arsenal did a very good job of closing them down, specifically out in the wider areas where Ljungberg and Hleb did a very good job of tracking Oliger and Van Bronckhorst. When you look to Barcelona's attacking wide players, they try to get the ball into the path of Giuly and Samuel Eto'o on several occasions, but Ashley Cole and Eto'o did a very good job in those 1v1 situations. And Ronaldinho was looking to drop off deeper to get on the ball ahead of the center backs to try and play in the runs of Giuly and Eto'o looking to break him behind. Where Arsenal went wrong was in the center of the pitch. You have 3v3 in that zone. You had Pires against Van Bommel, and you ended up seeing Deco against Fabregas. But there was no specific Arsenal player looking to step to Edmilson, and that's where you expect Gilberto Silva to step forward and press Edmilson, but Arsenal weren't pressing high, so if he does look to step into that zone, it creates a gap for Ronaldinho to drop into. One of the alternatives that Wenger could turn to was to have Pires or Fabregas step to Edmilson and then have Gilberto Silva cover, but even then their pressing would have to be synchronized because that still leaves space for Ronaldinho to receive the ball between the lines. The logical approach from Wenger should have been to have Henri step into the path of Edmilson, so what you need from Henri there is to step into the path of Marquez and block off the passing lane into Edmilson. That ensures that Edmilson can't dictate the tempo of the game from deeper positions and that Rafael Marquez can't consistently ping diagonal balls into Arsenal's third. However, we didn't see that from Arsenal, and what often ended up happening here was that Edmilson, Marquez, and Deco were constantly playing long diagonal balls out into the path of Giuly and Eto'o to get them into 1v1 situations. And that was a key theme for Barcelona within that opening 15 minutes, but predominantly the entire game. The problem here for Barcelona is that Ludwig Giuly wasn't getting the better of Ashley Cole. There was only one time where he did get into a good position, and that's when he failed to beat Cole but had the persistence to win the ball back and break into the left half space. But when you look at Barcelona's overall attacking scheme in those opening stages, the only real threat that they had was that Marquez, Edmilson, and Deco were having time to play balls into Giuly and into the path of Eto'o in those 1v1 situations. With Gilberto Silva ahead of that back four and Tyrrell looking to step into the path of Ronaldinho, Barcelona struggled to get in behind that Arsenal defense. However, all it took was one simple Ronaldinho involvement to shift the game. And what ended up happening there was that we had Deco stepping into the path of Gilberto Silva, and he cleared the ball into Hleb, who dropped off deeper. But Hleb was closed down by Eto'o and Van Bronckhorst, and Eto'o was able to win that ball, split Gilberto Silva and Fabregas, and find Ronaldinho between the lines. Ronaldinho was able to hold off Pires, and that's when we were able to see Ronaldinho's magic, as he was able to break forward and brush off Pires, split the two center backs to find Eto'o darting across Eto'o, and Eto'o was able to round Lehmann before he was taken out, and that's when we saw the referee send off Lehmann. Arsenal were down to 10 men, Almunia came on for Pires, and then they shifted into more of a 4-4-1. We saw Fabregas move to the left central midfield zone, we had Gilberto play right beside him, and now what we ended up seeing here was Deco shifted to the right side of that central midfield. We had Van Bommel pushing forward in that gap between Gilberto Silva and Hleb and often positioning himself in between the lines. And now there was more space for the Barcelona center backs to push into Arsenal's half based off the fact that Henri wasn't closing down those markers. So they had that superiority in that 3v1 zone, and with Deco dropping off a bit deeper and now Arsenal lacking a man in midfield, there was more space in that zone for Barcelona to dominate and also more space for Ronaldinho to receive the ball between the lines. And that's how Ronaldinho became effective in that first half. There were several examples where we end up seeing Ronaldinho bypassing that Arsenal backline. The first one, we end up seeing Deco splitting Gilberto, Silva, and Hleb to find Ronaldinho dropping off Toure. And Ronaldinho was able to take his touch away from Hleb and split the two center backs to locate Giuly running off Ashley Cole. But Cole did a very good job of tracking that run to ensure that Giuly couldn't receive the ball in right half space. Shortly after that, we end up seeing Edmilson with the ball in that midfield zone and Ljungberg shifting across to try and apply pressure. Edmilson takes his touch away from Ljungberg, but it ends up falling into the path of Deco, who slides the ball across Fabregas into Ronaldinho, dropping off into his own half. Ronaldinho is able to pick up that ball at that halfway line, run away from Ashley Cole, and then split Cole and Gilberto Silva and the two center backs, playing the ball across Sol Campbell for Ludwig Giuly, darting between the center backs, but Kolo Toure did a very good job of tracking that run, and the ball was able to fall into the path of Almunia. But in those three examples, you see how Ronaldinho was able to find space between the lines and pockets of space in that final third to finally dominate that game once Arsenal went down to 10 men. However, despite Barcelona dominating possession and playing 11v10 for majority of that first half, Arsenal did have a few routes to goal and did have a few openings in that opening half, also with the fact that they were able to take the lead. When you look at the avenues that Arsenal could approach, obviously you're looking to play through Henri, but what we ended up seeing here was down that left-hand side, Ljungberg failed to get the better of Oliger in 1v1 situations, but on the right there was a gap for Arsenal to exploit. Hleb was often moving into central positions, and that's where you could have Edmilson pick him up, but down that right-hand side, Eto'o was looking to push forward because Eto'o wasn't tracking his runs, and that's where you would see Eto'o look to step forward and run at Van Bronckhorst. Van Bronckhorst was the weak link for Barcelona, and what you often saw was Puyol looking to shift over to cover that space, and that in return created a gap for Henri to position himself in between Oliger and Rafael Marquez. The other avenues that Arsenal could exploit was Fabregas looking to step forward ahead of Deco based off the fact that Deco wasn't tracking those runs, and it allowed Fabregas to be that link and play positive passes if he received that ball in that zone. Initially, that did lead to Arsenal's first good chance of that game, and it was Fabregas receiving that ball to the left of Deco, and he was able to slide the ball out to Eto'o, and before Puyol could come across to help out Van Bronckhorst, Eto'o played a low cross into the box that saw Henri take his first touch across Rafael Marquez, and that's an angle where he should score, but he was denied by Valdez. Minutes later, we had Pires from a deep position locating Henri, once again making that run in between Oliger and Marquez, but when he brought it down in left half space, Marquez did enough to poke the ball away from him and then win a foul. Besides Henri looking to find that space between Marquez and Oliger, the real threat was down the right-hand side where we saw Eto'o constantly pushing forward, combined with the fact that he was winning those 1v1 duels against Eto'o. When he was pushing forward against Van Bronckhorst, what we often saw was Hleb making darting runs into that space behind him, but on two separate occasions we saw first Puyol, then Marquez coming across to ensure that Hleb couldn't offer a threat in that final third. But in the build-up to the free kick that led to Arsenal's goal, what we ended up seeing there was Toure get across Eto'o and push forward, and then slide the ball across Van Bronckhorst for Eto'o, and Eto'o is able to run across Van Bronckhorst and skip by Puyol before he was fouled, and that led to Henri's free kick that Campbell rose above Oliger to put Arsenal ahead. Following that goal, we did see Barcelona shift their tactics to combat with that threat. So rather than having Puyol shift across to help out Van Bronckhorst, there was a time where we had Eto'o pushing forward against Van Bronckhorst, and we ended up seeing Van Bommel and Edmilson come across to ensure that Eto'o couldn't offer a threat. However, when we look to the second half, we have to analyze it in three different phases. The first phase featuring Andre Iniesta, who was able to offer a bit of an impact off the bench. Iniesta did replace Edmilson, he slotted into that deep midfield zone, and Iniesta was brought in to offer penetration that Barcelona lacked in those central areas. Initially, we saw him ahead of Fabregas play a reverse ball ball between a narrow Ashley Cole and Ljungberg for Mark van Bommel breaking in behind. And the reason why that was able to happen was Ludwig Giuly's dart in between Campbell and Cole to drag Cole out of position. And we ended up seeing Eto'o drop off a bit deeper to pull out the center backs. However, when Van Bommel got into that zone, his cross was overhit. And later on, we saw Marquez push forward and he split the two central midfielders to find Iniesta between the lines. And with Toure being sucked out due to Eto'o's movement, Iniesta was able to skip by him and fire a low shot on goal. Barcelona were slowly starting to create more chances from open play as Arsenal dropped deeper, and that ended up forcing Rijkaard into another change, bringing on Larsson for Van Bommel, and that effectively did see Barcelona shift to a 4-2-3-1, with Ronaldinho playing off Larsson and Eto'o again shifting out to that left-hand side. But although it was logical for Rijkaard to possibly shift to a 4-2-3-1, given the fact that Barcelona were still behind against 10 men, the problem here was that you have Deco and Iniesta protecting the back four, and now with those attacking 6 players looking to push forward, Arsenal had a legitimate threat to goal in transition. Initially, we saw Ljungberg poke a ball beyond Iniesta into the path of Fabregas at the halfway line, and with Puyol coming across, Fabregas was able to brush him off the ball and break forward. And as Oliger did a very good job of tracking that run with Marquez shifting over, Fabregas was able to poke the ball into the path of Henri, and with Van Bronckhorst stepping towards him, Henri poked the ball across the Barcelona left back into Hleb, who broke into right half space but could only force Valdez into a save at the near post. Minutes later, we saw Fabregas splitting both Deco and Iniesta to find Ljungberg running across Oliger, and Ljungberg was able to hold off Oliger and slide the ball to Henri, shifting into that left channel, who was able to skip by Puyol and Marquez. But when he broke into left half space, he was able to skip by Puyol again, but his touch was heavy and he failed to get a shot on goal. So as you can see, Arsenal were able to exploit that 4-2-3-1 in transition down that left channel, and they were able to get Ljungberg and Henri into good positions in the box, but their poor finishing let them down. And when we look to the final phase of that second half, following Arsenal's 10-minute spell of transitional dominance, it involves 2 defensive substitutions. We ended up seeing Belletti come on for Oliger, and then we saw Wenger turn to Flamini for Fabregas for more defensive cover in midfield. However, Barcelona were able to complete a fight back in that next 10-minute spell, and it stemmed through the work of their substitutions. What we ended up seeing initially was Eto'o receiving the ball in that left channel, and he dragged out Hleb and Bommel, and he was able to pull the ball back to Iniesta. You have Gilberto Silva stepping towards Iniesta, but what should be identified here is Larsson making lateral movement across the box to pull out Toure. What we see from Iniesta is that he provides the penetration, splitting Gilberto Silva and Bommel to find Henrik Larsson, and Larsson ends up poking that ball into the path of Eto'o running off of Bommel. Eto'o takes a good first touch in towards that 6-yard box, and he's able to beat Almunia at the near post. And Barcelona's winner stems on the opposite flank, this time involving Belletti. What we see here is Belletti picks up a loose ball, and we have Ludwig Giuly taking Cole out of the game by holding the touchline. And then we see Larsson shifting laterally to the opposite half space to drag out Campbell. What we end up seeing now is that Belletti splits Ljungberg and Cole to get the ball into Larsson, and Larsson's able to hold it up, and he ends up splitting Campbell and Cole, who is watching Giuly but helping out Campbell. And what we end up seeing there is that when Larsson splits those 2 Arsenal defenders, he ends up combining with Belletti running off Ljungberg into right half space, and before Flamini could get across, he fires a low effort that once again beats Almunia at the near post. But when you break down that game as a whole, Arsenal only have themselves to blame here. They got their tactics initially spot on, and they were able to stifle Barcelona from creating chances. And even when they went down to 10 men, despite Ronaldinho's brief spell of dominance, they were able to weather the storm and take the lead. Rijkaard does deserve credit for his substitutions. They were involved in both goals. Larsson providing the penalty box presence, Iniesta the penetration in midfield, and Belletti the additional energy down the right, and he was able to score the winner. But when they shifted to that 4-2-3-1, Arsenal were still able to create 4 good chances that their key attacking players in Henri and Ljungberg in particular failing to convert. Hi everybody, thanks for watching and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the Interview show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the Interviews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.